Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 141. A very freilichen and happy Chodesh Kislev, Chassidus month. So this week we have in store hopefully a robust and stimulating program, commensurate with the month in which we're in. We're also in the week of Parsha Vayishlach, and this week is also Dalet Kislev, which is the anniversary of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin in the year Tafresh Peites. They were married. So we're celebrating their anniversary this week as well. So let's begin with Parsha Vayishlach and some other timely events. And we'll move our way into Dalet Kislev and use that as an opportunity to dedicate some of this class to matters around marriage, anniversaries, marriage, relationships, dating, and so on. So starting with Parsha Vayishlach, living with the times, which is this week's Parsha. So there are many messages, of course, and lessons in every Parsha, in every chapter. We try to focus on MyLife Chassidus Applied perspective, the prism looking at things in a personally relevant, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually relevant terms based on the teachings of Torah Chassidus. So two things come to mind that I'd like to share. One is, of course, right in the beginning of the chapter, we're talking here the end. This is the end of the story of Yaakov and Esav, essentially, where it began in 2 chapters back, both of them twin brothers struggling in their mother's womb. Rivka and Lu'umalum Yamotz, she's explained why is her pregnancy so difficult, because you have 2 nations inside of you, 2 archetypes. And then, of course, it only becomes more amplified as they are born and as they grow. One is the Ish Tzayid, Ish Melchama Yedid Tzayid, the warrior and the hunter. And the second, Yaakov, is Ish Tom Yeshiva Holim, the wholesome one, the scholar, the pure one. And essentially we have both these forces inside of us. And then, of course, the story continues, how Yaakov so-called buys the blessing of the firstborn and then steals the blessings that Yitzchak wanted to give Esav. Then he has to escape and goes for 20 years and lives under Lavan, where he builds his beautiful family, and to return to Eretz Yisrael. In this week's chapters, as he returns, Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, Yaakov sends messengers, either actual angels or messengers, to see where Esav is holding. He had no idea. Esav could still be furious and wanting to kill him, or Esav could be reconcilable and open to reconciliation with him. And he finds out that Esav is marching toward him, preparing for war. So what does Yaakov do? He prepares in 3 ways, as Rashi says, and the verses explain that number 1, he prays, he davens. Here we have the words, the famous classic, Koteinti mikol achsadim, I've been humbled, I've been diminished by all your kindness, and he's asking God to protect him. The second thing he prepares is a bribe to appease Esav. And number 3, he prepares for war. Ends up happening is the first 2 work, the bribe and the prayer work, and Esav does reconcile with Yaakov completely or not completely. Bottom line is they do reconcile to some extent. And then, of course, Esav says to Yaakov, let's live together side by side. Avi al Deini Se'eda. But Yaakov refuses and says, you go ahead and I'll come slowly. Snala li'iti. And Rashi explains that he wasn't trying to deceive him. It was not ready yet. But one day will come, Vayishlach Hashem Amlucha, when there'll be, as we read in the Haftarah of this week, that ultimately we will rejoin each other. And as the Haftarah says, V'shaftu as har Esav and Vayishlach Hashem Amluch. So this is the story as the Torah tells it. The relevance is, as I indicated earlier, these are 2 archetypes within each one of us, whether it's compared to the animal soul and the divine soul, or the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, or you can say the warrior within us that needs to work and make men's meat in this material world. And there's the transcendent one in each of us, the soul, the soulful one that looks to find a deeper purpose. And they really need to work together, which is why God created that you have a Jacob and Esav, you have a Yaakov and Esav, and they need to work together. However, one has to harness the other, and Yaakov has to harness Esav's power and hunting abilities and strength and warrior-like tendencies toward spiritual ends. And then, of course, the end of the story is that they will ultimately unite, and they represent, as I said, both individually in our own archetypes within ourselves, but also the two nations. Essentially, the nation Edom, Seir, Edom, Esav are all synonymous. At the end of this week's chapter, Magdiel, one of Esav's children and grandchildren, is Zuremi, is Rome. So the Roman Malchus Edom, which is our last Golus, our last exile in the Western world before Mashiach comes, is essentially the children of Esav. And of course, we have to learn to protect ourselves from them, but also ultimately to transform the nations of the world toward the Geula, which is the ultimate goal. And as the Rebbe explains that we are in that stage, when you look at the Sichos Vayishlach, Vayeshev Tovshin and Beis, he talks extensively about this, how now we're capable and we're ready to engage Esav and transform the material world, transform the Western world, the modern world, into a divine home. Now that wasn't always the case. When Yaakov was going and marching and coming up to approach Esav, in his mind he thought that Esav was ready. He was definitely ready for the Geula, as the Maimorim and Teirah Ed and Teirah Chaim explain. The Rebbe cites them in a number of sichos. However, when he realized Esav was not ready, he realized that time will take more time, and he realized he has to go slowly, and it would take time till the full birur and refinement would take place. But the time has passed. Fast forward now, 21st century, we are ready for that conclusion. So both on a personal, psychological level, we have the lesson that when we prepare, when we deal with the material challenges of our lives, there's no one way to go about things in life. And the same is true with our psychological challenges and emotional challenges. Prayer is necessary because we always need a higher force and a higher power to help us through any given situation. When you're bound above, you don't fall below. A bribe and appeasement suggests that you need to also think in terms, naturally, how can you so-called appease, how can you compromise, how can you negotiate, I should say, and gain what you want without having to necessarily go in full confrontation. And we prepare for war because when necessary, there has to be a battle. So even with our Yetzer Hara, we also have these three. One is we pray. We always want to have Hashem Ezrei, God's help and support in dealing with any challenge internally, any one of our own temptations or distractions and things that seduce us or in some way keep us from doing what we should be doing. Number two, you have to appease it, which is why Chassidus says that you have to appease the Nefesh Habamis. We're not talking about compromise, but like the Moshel, the famous analogy of the Baal Shem Tov that I mentioned a few weeks ago, which is that you have to give it food, you have to give it drink, you have to make it feel that it can also celebrate the divine on its terms, like Chanechel Naro Pidarke. You give a child a gift, you give a child a toy. That because the child understands the toy. At this point, they understand that that's the sweetness in a physical way, so they can be Shalei Lishma, Bo Lishma. From ulterior motives, you get to the more pure motive. And then at times, we do have to go to battle. There's the Mochamas HaYetzer. There are times when we do need to go to war, and we need to be strong about it, because we need to be confident and with simcha to be able to battle any voice of resignation or melancholy or demoralization and so on that comes from the other side of our being. And on a collective level, it means that the entire world also has the nations of the world, that when we deal with the material challenges of life and we deal with a modern world, there are times we always need to pray. There are times we need to so-called accommodate that world. We engage with it. We focus on we follow the customs of the land as long as it doesn't contradict halacha and law. And that's part of the process of translating, speaking in English, and going according to the customs of the land as it is in the laws of selling and buying, as the Rambam explains. And then there are times we do need to go to war. Not war with weapons, but war means that we do oppose positions or compromises or dilution or other forces that are either godless or not going towards the direction of a higher call, of answering to a higher calling, to an eye that hears, an eye that sees, and an ear that hears. So in all our lives, we always have to bear in mind that all three are necessary and they're all important. And of course, we learn when the Jews stood before Kriyas Yamsuf, at the Yamsuf, and the Egyptians were pursuing them, they also broke into four camps. One said go to war, one said to go back to Egypt, one said commit suicide, jump into the water, one said to pray. And all of them were unacceptable because Vayishlach is the way to go. Forge ahead. So you can say, how does that consistent with Yaakov's three ways. One of them is prayer, one of them is war, appeasement, another one. Why isn't there just Vayishlach? Because Vayishlach meant to keep God's command, said go to Har Sinai, that we must do. But that doesn't mean the other options don't have elements to it. To just rely on prayer, or just rely on war, or just rely on some type of negotiation, absolutely not. You're always forging ahead. But in the forging ahead, you have to be prudent and wise and figure out how to approach things in a way that will not just have resistance, but you're able to engage, you could say, recruit even the so-called material world, that it too becomes a springboard and a catalyst for spiritual growth. Okay, so that's on Parsha Vayishlach. Vayishlach also emphasizes the concept of shlichus, Vayishlach, that we all have to send out emissaries who represent our position. So that's another just footnote in this discussion. Now, before we get to Dalet Kislev, I want to mention another thing, which is December 7th was the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Now you could say, what relationship does it have to MyLife Chassidus applied? Well, we have a lesson from Pearl Harbor from the Rebbe himself. So 65 years ago, approximately this time, it was on the 7th of Kislev. It was Thursday, Parsha Vayetze. So a group of people who were supporters of Timchet Mim in Yeshiva went to see the Rebbe. The Rebbe spoke to them. And at the end, some of the Gvirim said that they would give more money if the Rebbe came to the dinner, the annual dinner for Timchet Mim for the Yeshiva. And the Rebbe basically said that he's not an appeal maker, and that what he has to do is he has to do. That shouldn't concern what they have to do, the Gashmis they have to do. You can look up the Sikh itself, how the Rebbe, so to speak, explained himself there. But then the Rebbe went on and said that we find something interesting in the United States. There is a thing called the tax code, and you find that when it comes to income tax, people who are in a higher bracket obviously have to pay a higher percentage. The Rebbe talks about that. So he says, if that's the case in the negative, which is for a wealthy person to pay taxes, more taxes is not a positive thing for him. So for sure, it's the way in the good side of things. Meruba midatev midis peronis, and the Rebbe says, so when you give, let's say, $5,000 to charity, that's the number he uses. So when you're in a higher tax bracket, you should be giving a lot more than that, and the blessing is a lot more. So the same idea of a higher tax bracket causing you to have to give more taxes also means that you also are worthy of more blessings when a person gives more tzedakah. And then the Rebbe concluded and said with a smile, he said, we're now 10 years from Pearl Harbor, because that was 1952. And Pearl Harbor was, as I said, December 7th, 1947. 1942, I'm sorry. It was 1942, and this was 1952. So the Rebbe said, the following. Now it's 10 years from Pearl Harbor, and we know Pearl Harbor was the surprise Japanese attack on the American, in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, on the American Navy. And the Rebbe said, then during that war, the Chidduch was the concept of unconditional surrender. Because at the end of the war, that was 42 when they attacked, but then America went to war with Japan. At the end of the war, there was a demand for unconditional surrender, the Rebbe said. So the Rebbe said, why do you have to make conditions on me that if I come, you give more, you give less? We're now in a state of unconditional surrender. You have to just give unconditionally without any conditions, give $10,000. That was the Rebbe's expression. So obviously there's a lesson from Pearl Harbor. Now we are, as I said, 75 years from Pearl Harbor, 65 years from this Sikha. So you can say the lesson is the concept. There are times where, as I said before with the war, that sometimes when you go with an attitude, as the Frierdiker Rebbe says, the Rebbe cites it very often, that when you're dealing with a challenge, there's ways to go about it. You deal with the challenge and you figure out ways. Then there's, of course, the lichatchila riber approach. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says there was a custom in some wars, in some armies, that before they even went out to war, before the first battle, they would sing a victory march. A march shel nitzachon. They haven't even fought a war. They haven't won anything. But it's the attitude. You go with that attitude that you're absolutely victorious, and the other side will unconditionally surrender without even a question about it. That's the attitude that one person has. That you go above. You're always above your enemy, and it's kiseitse, it's outside of you. So in a sense, war is not you. You're above the war, but sometimes you have to do the battles. The unconditional surrender adds the dimension that there's no room for compromise. There's actually total victory when the Geula will come, and there will be a total victory of holiness over the profane, not partial, not conditional surrender. So Pearl Harbor offers us the lesson, I should say, of being able to demand unconditional surrender, obviously in the right circumstances. I remember once it was Chanukah, it was Zeis Chanukah, I think it was Shalom Bayis, which would be, Shalom Bayis would be exactly 35 years ago. So the Rebbe spoke to the children then, and he said that every day Chanukah, the flame is, of course, dispels the darkness, and every day it grows. You add a flame each night. But then when it comes to Zeis Chanukah, you have the full attack, the Rebbe said the words, because the language of Tzivos Hashem, of the warriors of Hashem, the army of Hashem, full attack means sometimes you only use some resources, then you have all the light that dispels all the darkness, a type of unconditional surrender. So that's a lesson that we can take from Pearl Harbor, an interesting sikha that I've been learning a lesson even from that regarding the resistance that some people may have when it comes to giving tzedakah, making conditions and so on. Sometimes you just have to kabbalah sel, completely leg zachavek, and just accept what is the right thing to do without parkenzech and excuses, without all the different so-called tangential smoke screens, and just allow to accept the entire message that we need to absorb and the action that we need to act on. Okay, so with that, let us move now to Yudalt Kislev. So Yudalt Kislev, Tafresh Peites. Okay, Tafresh Peites was in Varsha, in Warsaw, was the wedding of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. Then, of course, the Rebbetzin Chaimushka was the second daughter of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And ever since, this has become a Yontif. And the Yontif was fully acknowledged by the Rebbe in Yud Dalet Kislev Tafshin Yud Dalet, which was from Peites, was, what was it, Peites, Sadik Tes, Tafshin Tes, 25 years. The 25th anniversary, the Rebbe spoke about it. That's when he said the Maimon L'Chodedi, later he was Magia, based on the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimon that was said by the Rebbe's Chasana. And that's when the Rebbe said the famous line that this is the day that has bound me to you and you to me. And may we see Peiris Tevis, may we see good fruit come out of it. Of course, my Peira mitzvahs, Peiris are mitzvahs, but Peiris is also what comes out from Pruruvu, from a marriage, Peiris, and by a Rebbe, by our Rebbe. The Peiris are the Talmidim and the Talmides, which are considered to be Teldeseyim, Shal Tzadikim, and these are the children, the spiritual children, all the Rebbe gave birth to, which is considered to Kol HaMalamed as Ben Chavei Teira. Anyone who teaches their friend's child Teira is considered as if they give birth. And actually in the Pasuk in Bamidbar, Moshe is called the father of Elazar and Samar because he taught them. So there's a biological father, there's a spiritual father. And in that sense, we are all connected. Yudalt Kislev, therefore, is our simcha and our joy and our celebration. So it's, I thought, a good opportunity to talk about a few questions that we've talked about in the past. Marriage, of course, relationships, dating is a very popular and relevant topic. But there's some more questions, and some of them that have not been addressed. I want to discuss some of those. It's actually very fascinating things. So we're the 88th wedding anniversary, and what lessons can be derived about marriage? What better way to honor the marriage of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin than by talking about what best way to emulate of what a model marriage is like, and the Chassidic way, and the relevance, therefore, of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin to us today. Now remember, the Rebbe, of course, our Rebbe, a marriage with the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe said that was the day it bound us to him and him to us and us to him. So clearly this is something that lives on till this day. It's a davar nitzchi that never goes away because Chabad leapt, and the Rebbe's teachings and the Rebbe himself lives through us, and basically the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin live through us, because what we do is essentially a direct product of the influence and the hashpah and the inspiration that we receive from there. So its relevance is extremely important in all is extremely important in all matters of our lives, and particularly, as I said, in the arena of marriage and relationships. So let's address a few questions in that regard. let's begin with this question. Is it healthy for a husband and wife to work together? So, recently, I did an answer from the Rebbe actually directly answering this question emerged. And here, let me read to you that letter. And the question was to the Rebbe. So the Rebbe says, clearly the Rebbe is talking to the woman who asked the Rebbe. So the Rebbe has been engaged about whether you should help your husband in his work. So the Rebbe says, Lo tamid tev kishabal v'ishtei asukim b'chol inyaneihem biyachad. It's not always good that when a husband and his wife are involved in all their matters together. Ubefrat, and specifically, kishe'echad mehem bal efi chazak, if one of them is a strong presence, v'lechein kedim shehichlit, kedim shetachlit b'zeh, before you decide about this, tenasa, try it out, b'zman ha'chefesh, in free time. Obviously, be'im maskim al zeh bayla b'chefetz. In other words, that if your husband agrees to it, then it should be with his obviously support and blessing. V'tachlit behesem lahatetzos, and then make a decision based on what results come out during this test period. Be'im sofik ein kedai. In case you have a doubt, it's not worthwhile. I think it's a very direct answer, and thank God there's a direct answer from the Rebbe to this question, which is the best of all. I don't think it needs much analysis. The reason the Rebbe says it's not always good for husband and wife to be involved in everything, bakel and everything, I think is obvious, but I'll just spell it out. Because the part of life's relationship, and we all know in love, the same is true, even people deeply in love with each other, part of love is also space. Two individuals does not mean they become one, they're not clones. They have different personalities and they have different interests and different things that stimulate them. Now, in a good marriage, obviously they complement each other and they both can help the other in areas where one person may be stronger than another, but if they're on top of each other, time-wise, and especially in areas, and there's no space at all, then what you create is a potential conflicts. Secondly, being with each other all the time is another factor, and the pressures of work that come into play. Can you really have healthy boundaries at work? Let's say when you're dealing with a worker, you can demand and expect things. But if it's a spouse, then there could spill over, certain resentments. Are you supposed to be treating me like, are you treating me like a husband or a wife? Or am I your worker? Or am I your employee? And so on. And employees and spouses are not always as compatible in that sense. Can two people work it out? Clearly the Rebbe gives room that it's possible, but you see, if there's a doubt, he says not worthwhile. If you can work it out and then test it and see. But clearly now what this means, proceed with caution. It's not an easy thing to do, and most likely probably not the best option if there are other options. Now, of course, if one person has a strong personality, that only compounds matters. So I think the answer is clear, and a very direct answer from the Rebbe about this topic. Okay, next question. Oftentimes, people are conflicted when dating, because meeting a new person means learning to appreciate a personality that may be different or unfamiliar to one's own. Among the many traits that a person houses, which ones are the critical ones to look out for? How can one know of the qualities that they really want on finding are perhaps trivial and not essential? So bottom line, what should we be looking for in a Shidduch? Okay. So firstly, let me refer you to a few episodes that we've discussed this topic. Episodes 43, 71, 86, and 95. And let me use this opportunity to tell you that all these programs, live after their broadcast Sunday nights 8 to 9, they become part of our archive. You can find them all. There's now 140 episodes. This will be the 141st, which are online at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. So you could see them all. They're all archived there. Additionally, you can search by topic. And if you go to when you click on the actual video, you go to the YouTube version, you'll see it's also time-stamped, which means you don't need to go through the whole hour to listen to the entire thing. You can actually see the topics, and there's a link to the time when it begins, whether it's 2 minutes in, 20 minutes in, 30 minutes in, and so on. So please take advantage of it. It's quite a extensive resource, And in episodes 43, 71, 86, and 95, I addressed many issues about dating. And now I'll talk about another angle, which again is a note from the Rebbe that recently discovered, which is what is primary. So I'll read again the answer of the Rebbe, again a direct answer, which is always the best. In matters of a shidduch, a match, especially in this case, what is the primary thing? The person should fit. Here clearly it seems to be talking about the bride, meaning the woman, that she should fit the pasuk that says, Isha Yiras Hashem Hitisalo. So we know in Eshes Chayil, which is at the end of the book of Proverbs, which we say every Friday night, so Sheker Achen Vehevel Ayefi, but what's the end? Ki'im Isha Yiras Hashem Hitisalo. A woman that is a God-fearing woman, that's the one you should praise. So the Rebbe says, so that's the ikir. Chayil Kemuvenu Poshet Balas Midas Tevis. This includes, obviously, someone that has midas tevis, good midas. Good midas means kind, sensitive, warm. V'kol ashar, and everything else, this is the Rebbe's actual language. Be'erech hanal, relative to the above, tofel de tofel. Is secondary of secondary, not just secondary. Clear, directive, and so on. So you'll say, 1 second, what about, we have personality differences and so on. Obviously, it has to click and so on, but the question is, what do you focus on? What are you looking for? What is the primary trait? So very clear. The Rebbe continues, when a person will focus and concentrate on the above, God will definitely give them a Shidduch b'korev. You'll definitely find your Shidduch, your match, b'korev meaning in the short term. And there'll be many other qualities in addition to the quality, the primary quality of above. So in other words, it's not, obviously there are other qualities, but these are the primary ones, and they'll also come along. Then the Rebbe continues and says this should strengthen in your day-to-day the commitment to according to Torah mitzvahs. This includes b'tochen b'Hashem, trust in God, and therefore that will eliminate the fear, the pachad, about making a decision and commitment to Shidduch. And then the Rebbe concludes with a blessing. Okay. So there you have yet another direct settle. Now, you could say this sounds, someone will say, God forbid, this sounds simplistic. Is that all it is? Why then so complicated? Well, first of all, it's complicated because we make it complicated. When a person has all kinds of stuff in their head, and they have all kinds of preconceived notions, and maybe comparing to others, and maybe a low self-esteem, and other things thrown into the picture, it becomes very complicated. What the strength of this is that the Rebbe is telling us directly what the primary thing is. What are the ingredients for a healthy marriage? Yiras Hashem and midas tevis. Yeah. Now you'll say, doesn't the person have to be appealing to you physically? Yeah. No one's saying not. The question is, what's a ikir and what's a tofel? Obviously, someone that's not appealing is something that you can't look at or something that you can't relate to. Obviously, not everyone is for everyone. But we're talking about when you, all things, all the level field being equal, and all things considered, what are the primary things to look at? Okay. Again, I refer you to the episodes I mentioned before because I talk more about these matters as well. Next question, said like this, like somewhat of a mini marriage section in honor of your Dalet Kislev. How important is it to actively and constantly work on Shalom Bayis? If I have a good and happy marriage, should I always be working on making it even better? Will my being happy with the status quo of my relationship affect other areas of my life? So here too, let me first refer you to previous episodes where I've discussed this, episodes 2, 12, 39, 48, 50, and 60. And actually they're discussed directly what after the honeymoon, how do you sustain, how do you maintain a dynamic and passionate and exciting marriage after time passes and so on. So here you have an answer from the Rebbe that also was recently discovered. But this is not so much directive. The Rebbe is just saying, how important Shalom Bayis is even to other areas in life. Someone wrote to the Rebbe that he lost a businessman. He lost some packages of material that I guess was he was dealing in business, and he's asking the Rebbe for a bracha to find these packages. So the Rebbe says, I already warned you a number of times on the importance of Shalom Bayis. And what shall I do that you're not listening at all? You just follow your own heart. Now, I don't know the context of this, but it appears to be that the Rebbe is saying to him that if you had Shalom Bayis and you worked on it, you would have more peace of mind and not be so hectic and not maybe lose things either. Now, this is not a matter of, God forbid, a punishment or something. It's just that when you don't have Shalom Bayis, when you don't have peace at home, how could it not upset a person's life? Yeah, we can compartmentalize and go to work and do other things. But the foundation at home, that's why Shalom Bayis is such an ikar. Why the Rambam paskins at the end of laws of Chanukah, that the whole Torah was given to bring Shalom Bayis. And that's why you even erase Hashem's name, he says, by Seita, in order to preserve Shalom Bayis. Because Shalom Bayis, besides the fact that it's so vital for the family welfare and for future generations and for God himself, unity is such a critical component, it spills over and affects one's life. So again, I don't know the context, and I don't want to in any way overstep something that I may speculate on something I'm not be sure, but it seems that it was connecting a person's Shalom Bayis with other so-called havoc or mishaps that may be happening in a person's life. Now here's another interesting note about Shalom Bayis, and this again complements what I've spoke about in earlier episodes, which also I just want to read. It's just fascinating, I thought. And that basically the Rebbe taking approach, does Chassidus have a special way of looking at Shalom Bayis different than those without Chassidus? So that's the question on the table, which is obviously fitting to Dalet Kislev, because the Chassidus is a chassan of a Rebbe and a Rebbetzin, our Rebbe and Rebbetzin. Chassidus have a unique approach to Shalom Bayis. So here's an interesting note from the Rebbe. Some of you may recall one of those episodes that I mentioned, I don't remember which one, I wrote a very interesting note from the Rebbe there about how this is issues that people have in marriage is something that's common, and it's not like something you should be frightened of. And the approach to take it is to take it step by step and to try different things, but not to take anything for granted. Now, in that context, I want to say regarding the previous question, marriage is like anything in life that is valuable, can never be taken for granted. It's a constant investment. It's a constant process. It's like climbing a mountain in a good way. You have to put effort to it. You cannot just take for granted and say, I'll just rest and coast. Does that mean never imagine, constant work? No. Obviously, there are times of comfort, but there is to be constant effort on each spouse, on the behalf of each spouse, to initiate, to reach out, to not take ever for granted a marriage. With that said, here is the note, and I'll just I'll translate it. The Rebbe writes, I don't have the question, but here's the response. Poshet, it's obvious. Shegodl hashalom b'chlal u'b'frat sheben ish li'ishtei. How great peace is in general, and specifically between spouses. Shelechen kol yegi v'ishtadlus b'zeh kedayest. Therefore, all effort and ishtadlus, all effort and all exertion and effort, everything possible is worthwhile. That's one. It's numbered, number one. Number two. It's obvious, kanira, or it seems to be, that in your relationship to your husband, till now, you've been going with the approach of anshe musar, which is what? To demonstrate to him his faults, his flaws, and emphasize them. We're not going to cry over the past. Al koponim, from here on, you should embrace also in this darkei Chassidus, the ways of Chassidus, to show him and demonstrate his qualities. And therefore, if he uses them more than he's used it till now, even though he's already used them till now, everybody will benefit physically and spiritually. So instead of focusing on the weaknesses and the flaws, focus on the positive, the derech Chassidus. So here you have a direct Hera, better than any Hera anyone can give from Dalet Kislev. What do we learn from Dalet Kislev? How are Chassidic marriages? Chassidic marriage, not like a Musadik approach, where you're focusing on the negatives, you're not good in this, you're not good in that, and constantly emphasizing that. Rather focusing on the qualities of what you're capable of, what you could be, not what you are or what you're doing, and not the flaws, but what you could be and and the great benefit that will come out of that. Number 3. This is not so clear to me. Clearly, this person must have been in the police force. So the Rebbe says, when you consider the change for good, or the change rather, from the time when he was in the police, when he was part of the police department, you see that it's a sapchamam, it's mamash, a transformation from one extreme to the next. And this is not just a matter of the past, because when he walks in the street and meets many different things that remind him, and the Yetzer Hara, who's of course a very skilled at his trade, will immediately begin try to seduce him. I'll tell you the truth, I'm reading something from a note that I can't fully understand, so I maybe should stop right here because I don't understand it, so I'm not going to go explain it. I just saw it in the same note, so I decided, let me just read it. But let me just read it till the end. It's clearly that something was going on there was some type of challenge. And he says, but compared to what it was, you could see it's mamash esapche, and it's something that is a present challenge all the time. The Rebbe continues, and because you've been educated by him, and you're the grandson from Chassidim of Rebbe Rabbeim for several generations, and all the benefits that were said on him, so that will give you the strength to deal with all these challenges. As I said, it's not really relates, it seems to me, and that's I apologize for continuing the note, but that note, I'll just continue reading, I thought it was connected to the marriage issue. I don't think so. So obviously, it is a number 3, so maybe there is connection. I will do more research and background. Let me use this opportunity. If anybody's familiar with the background behind this note, please share it with me and I'll share it with the public. Okay. Then at the end, the Rebbe finally says, which is clearly also not connected, he's talking about listening to the doctor's instructions, and Hashem should bless you all with good news in all the matters, with techsimcha u'tuv levav. So clearly it's important to know what this note was written about, but I go back to the first part, very clear, the Chassidic approach of dealing with a marriage. Okay, fine. Another question, which is somewhat related. Chassidus describes the clash between the body and soul, and really any two antagonistic elements, as two kings vying for the same crown. Both kings can't wear the same crown, though. This is an expression when the Levana came to complain and said, Shnei Ma'edis, there's two great luminaries. You can't have one king, we can't have two crowns for one king. And that's when God said, diminish yourself, and then the son will be the greater luminary. So the question is this a rule that holds for always, or have we perhaps reached the age in which two kings can wear the same crown? If yes, how does this translate into every aspect of life, and that has two polar elements, for example, the male and female dynamic? So, I'm applying this to the issue of marriage. Who is the king and who is the queen? Well, of course, a husband is a king, a woman is the queen, and you could ask the question, who's in charge? So the fact of the matter is, we know marriage is a partnership, and each one has their role to play. Isha kshera esed etzein baila, it says, the righteous woman will follow her the will of her husband. But as the Rebbe explains, esed etzein baila also means create the will of the husband. If he's not behaving the way he should behave, she can create it and has the power to do so. So I think in marriage it's probably best not to try to figure out who's boss and who's second in command. Many people say that the woman should be really the keres habayis and really be the one that's in charge. But on the other hand, so-called on a front level, on the front end of things, Sometimes the husband seems to be. They say the joke they say is that the man wears the pants in the family, and the wife tells him what pants to wear. I don't know if that fits into the Chassidus applied aspect. I haven't seen that in Chassidus directly, but definitely you could see in some Chassidic couples that's the case. But the most important thing is not to allow egos to get in the way, and there's a bittul, where both partners are joining together, serving God, serving the shlichus that we were given, the mission in this world. And the mission that Rebbe has given each one of us, then different ways to fulfill that mission. And the way Hashem made it was the husband and wife build a family together, each have their contributions, and it shouldn't be an issue in that regard. As far as, in general, the question, Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila, it says, and the Kevet to save of Gover, the Rebbe does speak, as we get closer to Mashiach's time, the woman will be, the feminine energy will be more dominant than the masculine energy. In a sense, it will rise, in the sense where during Golus and so on, the masculine energy was stronger than the mashpia. The mile of the makabel, the mile of the levana will rise and becomes many ways greater than the mashpia, the giver. So the answer to that question is yes, indeed. We are coming into a time like that. And I don't know if we could say wear the same crown. It's two crowns, and they can wear the same crown, because if you have the bittul, you can then work together, and you don't have to have this question, why do we need, we need one crown? You can't have two people leading, or two forces leading. So that regarding the issue of Shalom Bayis, as far as also the other entities that I've touched upon, where Chassidus talks about the power of the makabel being elevating as Mashiach comes. Okay, now we have, I believe, some follow-up. Yeah. Before we do to follow up, let's deal the question with is Tanya racist? Yes, very blunt question. Is Tanya racist? Is Tanya racist? At the end of chapter 1 in Tanya, Tanya describes the superiority of the Jewish soul over the Gentile soul. This statement makes me uneasy because it seems to undermine the mantle of good deed. How can it be that an indecent Jew has a loftier soul than a respectable Gentile? Can someone be superior only by virtue of him being born Jewish? Can you please explain how this sense of superiority felt by Jews is a good thing? Because to me it seems to mitigate personal responsibility. Yeah. Another questioner asks in different language, I guess, I feel Hashem led me to your... Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. I feel Hashem led me to your podcast, and I'm very grateful for that. My question has to do with the reason I have not thus far studied the Tanya. I've heard several Jews talking about the teaching of the Tanya that Jews have unique souls and that non-Jews have souls that are much more removed from Hashem or are even not connected to God. I simply cannot accept this. How could the souls of, say, Mother Teresa and Mahatma Gandhi be classified as lower or less connected to Hashem than, say, the soul of a Jewish gangster or even that of an ordinary assimilated Jew whose life consists of the pursuit of personal gain without any thought to Hashem? This sweeping classification of non-Jewish souls as inferior strikes me as an example of where religion so often goes wrong. It gives Jews a pass to feel superior, whatever their behavior, while non-Jews are inevitably inferior, whatever their merits. Could you please comment on this? Thank you. Okay, there's another question related, but let's deal with this one. So here too, I have addressed this topic a number of times. I don't have in front of me, do I have in front of me the episodes? No, I don't. Sorry about that. But again, you can look it up through searching, as I mentioned before. Let's begin with this. The Torah cannot be racist, period, for one simple reason. Because God created the races, and God created every human being. So when you say that a human being was created in the divine image, how can you in any way denigrate that divine image? Then when you look at the mission in Pirkei Avos that says, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem, how precious, how special, desirable is the human being created in the Tzelem Elokim, divine image. Afterwards he says, Chviv in Yisrael, the specialness and the beauty and preciousness of Jews, and also Jews and the receiving of Torah. So the fact of the matter is, anyone that makes that claim simply doesn't understand Torah, or is distorting what it says in the Torah. The Alter Rebbe on the Perek Aleph, first of all, is quoting Eitz Chaim. He's quoting some Gemaras, and as I said, it's Torah, so there's no way that it could be racist. So we go with those set of eyes. Then when you read the Tanya, Don't read it in terms of how human beings may read it as superior or inferior. Read it as two entities God created. Each one has a role to play. And when you say, the Tanya says, Ein be'am tev klal, they have no good at all, then goes on to say, Chesed lo mechatas, the good they do is for ulterior motive. It's very clear that everybody does things for ulterior motive, Jews too. So how do you explain that? So the answer is that there are different dimensions of how people are motivated. And even a Jew can also be motivated, l'shalei l'shma, it says, le'elam yasek adam l'shalei l'shma. So that's number one. Regarding the actual statements there, as I said, if you don't take it in the eye and from the perspective of a human perspective, think of it from a divine perspective, God does not create junk. God creates everything with purpose. Now, human beings can choose to follow that purpose or not follow that purpose. And that's the key here. If a person chooses to be idolatrous and pagan, remember, Adam and Eve served God. Then they ate from the tree of knowledge. It's their children and grandchildren that began to become pagans and idolatrous. That's the nations of the world. And then among those nations came Bnei Shem, the children of Shem, and particularly Avraham Avinu, who defied the pagan nations that became idolatrous. So when you talk about the nations of the world that he's talking about there, Evdei Kechovim Mazolos, are people who have chosen an idolatrous path. And there, the Goyishkeit, as I've always explained, it's not necessarily the Goy, because proof in the fact is that a Goy has the ability, a non-Jew, to follow the 7 Noahide laws, and then he has a share in the world to come. Can something that has no good have a share in the world to come? Now this is not even quoting now, the main thing I want to quote from Rabbi Hillel Paritcher. He quotes the Alter Rebbe as explaining that the end of chapter 1 in Tanya is not Chassidus Mesela. So the Alter Rebbe is talking about the category of Goyim that the Chumash talks about, Kanamis Maisa Kanani, the Gentile personality and archetype of an idolatrous pagan individual or race. And it's not an attack or an accusation, it's describing what it was the facts are. Now, today we live in a time where you can argue that most non-Jews are in the category, potential category of righteous Gentiles. And when they live up to that, and you see nations that have lived up to it and how they behaved during the Holocaust. You had Chassidus Meselim, you had people who behaved, like Ein Behem Teiv Klal, they behaved exactly that way. The Tzemach Tzedek says Ein Behem Teiv Mitzad Atzmei Klal, meaning on their own, because there's no such thing that doesn't have a spark of the divine. The Rebbe Rashab explains, it's like a chatich and nas and avela, it's like a kosher piece of meat that fell into a non-kosher, so it becomes overwhelmed by it and therefore bottled, completely nullified. But there's no such thing as no good in anything. That's impossible. This is all explained in the commentaries. I discussed it back previous episodes. I will mention next week which ones, because for some reason I didn't mark them here. So you have to understand that you're talking about a Goyish archetype, the archetype of a nation that is corrupt, that is selfish, that is narcissistic. And that's what he's talking about. Righteous Gentile has a share in the world to come, which means he has a neshama, not a Jewish soul. Now, this still doesn't mean there isn't a difference between Jew and non-Jew, but it's a whole different thing. It's not one is good and one is evil. The question is, what level? Chassidus explains, and there's a beautiful sichas that discusses this in Chelik Tezvov and Likutei Sichas. There's a Noyach sicha about Shabbos, about a non-Jew not supposed to keep Shabbos. It explains because the Ummah nations of the world, their inyan is to bring the divine into existence. So that's Mamala Kalam and the divine as it relates to existence. And the Jews have an additional component where they bring a divine that's beyond. But we also know, and you can look this up in Likutei Sichas, volume 13, there's a whole bunch of footnotes from the Rebbe on a letter that he writes, Yud Beis Tammuz letter, on the Rambam Sefer Chashmita V'Yevel that says, Lo Shevet Levi Bilvad, not just Shevet Levi, but every person. And he makes it clear, even non-Jews, that separates himself from materialism can become Kedesh Kadoshim, holy of holies. As the Gemara says, that Akum, someone who learns Torah, a guy that learns Torah, is like a Kohen Gadol that goes into the holy of holies. Rashi explains, meaning Torah that's connected to him in his responsibilities, the 7 Noahide laws, which, as you may know, is much more than 7. It's a whole. If every Jew kept the 7 Noahide laws, we'd have Mashiach here. It's essentially the 10 Commandments without Kibbud Av, honoring your parents and Shabbos, because the fundamentals of a civilization. But then there's an additional element. So the fact of the matter is, yes, there are non-Jews that can be more righteous in their behavior than Jews, unfortunately, and because in tribute, by virtue of the birthright that they have, which is created in the divine image. A Jew could have a chelik elikam mamish, a divine soul, but unfortunately, if he chooses badly, God forbid, it's concealed. We're not measuring people. We don't even measure Jews in this fashion, who has a higher or not higher. The fact of the matter is, we all have a responsibility to live up to our soul's destiny. That's why we don't expect and we don't want a non-Jew to convert. Why? Because you can serve God perfectly the way you are. You don't have to be Jewish to convert. It's not like other religions. Because you have your destiny, and you can be a Chassidic Misalim, and the Gemara says, and Tosfos says, Eitzer, they have a special place, souls, and they do have the capacity. So it's important to put this all into context. Now, this does not negate what it says in Tanya. Tanya still stands because there is that element of goyishkeit. You can have a goyisher b'kirbecha, and that's what the Tanya is trying to explain. And then there's obviously what the Jewish soul, the Jewish potential, the Jewish possibilities. So that's how I would present it. Unfortunately, it could be presented in a way that can be very off-putting, like you write, and I understand that. But I think if you put it into context, you realize that it's not quite that way. As I said, based on the axiom, the first axiom, there's no such thing. God created human beings, so there's no way that the Tanya or Torah includes the Tanya could be racist. Another question. Why do Jews feel like Gentiles still have ill feeling toward them? Is this holding on to resentment that's long past its due date? So here's a letter from the Rebbe. It's from Chofel, dated 20th of El, Tavshin Lamed Hey, August 27th, 1975. And I'll just read it quickly because he addresses it directly. There's no name, but it's addressed to a person from Montreal, Quebec. I duly received your letter and regret unavoidable delay to acknowledge same. You write that you find it difficult to fully understand why the Jewish people seem to feel so strongly that the Gentiles are not well disposed toward them, especially since you personally do not feel this way about the Jews. May I say, first of all, that I'm gratified to hear about your good feelings, and I do hope that you will avail yourself of every suitable opportunity to let people know how you feel in this matter so they emulate you. As for your question, what basis, if any, there may be for Jews to feel suspicion or even frightened, as it seems to you, about the Gentiles' feelings toward them? Surely there's an obvious explanation of that in what happened in our time and before our own eyes, obvious at any rate to those who survived the Holocaust in Europe and found a haven in this country. Considering that one third of the Jewish people was callously decimated by a Gentile nation and its collaborators, while the rest of the Gentile world looked, and sometimes not even as indifferent observers, a subject too painful to dwell on, particularly in this letter in view of your personal feelings. I mention it only by way of reply to your question. The explanation is fairly obvious, and it is surprising that it has eluded you. Moreover, seeing the attitude of the vast majority of the members of the United Nations toward the remnants of the Jewish people, it clearly reinforces the suspicion that the attitude of the Gentiles, generally speaking, for there have always been exceptions, has not changed radically. By way of contrast, it is noteworthy that Jews on their part have a duty to encourage and help every Gentile to abide by the divine commandments which have been given to all mankind, namely the so-called 7 precepts given to the children of Noah, which are the minimum standards of universal ethics and morality, law and order, without which no human society can long survive. This is expected of the Jew regardless of the Gentiles' attitude toward Jews. Similarly, Jews are commanded to practice charity and benevolence towards Gentiles along with Jews. No doubt you also know the Jewish contribution to the concepts of liberty and humanitarianism and others. Even the motto of the United Nations, "Nation shall not lift up a sword against nation," is an ideal divinely inspired by a Jewish prophet for Jews and through them for Gentiles. This too incidentally pointedly underscores the contrast between the said ideal displayed there on the wall with what is going on there between the walls. Again, there's no need to dwell on this as noted earlier. There you go. No commentary necessary. Let's now do some follow-up and the Chassidus question and then the MyLife essays. Here's the follow-up. Follow-up one is about religion and the founding fathers. It's a rather long letter. I don't think I'll read the whole thing, but I'll give you the gist of it. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for your wonderful shiurim on a weekly basis. You are bringing much light to the world. In your last talk, you discussed how the founding fathers of the USA were Christian men, but you seemed ambivalent about the fact that religion was the predominant force and the Bible was really a founding document of the USA. The following is long, and I know that you may not have the time to read all this on your program, but I thought it important that at least you know. And I'll just read a few of the points, and then, as I said, it's a longer letter. Maybe we'll post it so everybody can read it. The founding fathers were religious men, and their religion and beliefs were what shaped the USA. Our founding era runs from 1760 through about 1805. And you may have wondered what gave these brave men the strength to be able to do what they did. When you look at what our founding fathers and others quote, the Bible is the far and away the number one source they quoted. In that sense, you can say the Bible itself is a founding document. The Bible was so quoted that even nowadays we have some 250 idioms that come from the Bible, such as the skin of your teeth from Job. I'll give you my 2 cents from Mark. Okay, that's from obviously not the Bible. That's a leopard can't change its spots. There's nothing new under the sun, and so on. The Bible is so ingrained in our culture, and it stems from our earliest times as a nation. We wouldn't be the same America without the Bible. It goes on now to quote John Knox Witherspoon, John Quincy Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Patrick Henry, George Washington, and others, and how many times they quote the Bible, and so on. So again, it's a long letter, but I have to say the following. I wasn't ambivalent. I was ambivalent because the founding fathers themselves did not necessarily see themselves as religious, more like deists. And absolutely, I quoted actually the book On Two Wings, and there are some other great books that take the quotes from the founding fathers, and absolutely they based it on the Bible and the beliefs of essentially that all men are created equal and the rights that everyone is guaranteed, endowed to us by our Creator. Okay, so thank you for that, and at the end of the day, it complements and supports the ideas that we discussed last week on this matter. Let's go to another follow-up, which is what defines a mashpia. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you for bringing up the important idea of having a mashpia. I think it is important to add that a mashpia should be someone who is not just Chassidish, but has some professional training in the topic she is being asked about. I say this from bitter experience. Before I got married, I had some grave doubts about the person I was dating. I was in 770 and respected one of the mashpiim there. While very sincere, he gave me terrible advice against my best judgment. And what I realize now is incorrect advice. I got engaged. Later, unbeknownst to me, my parents got very concerned about the engagement and went to one of the Rebbe's maskirim to discuss. He told my parents' secretaries. He told my parents not to mix in and encouraged the engagement. Finally, I went to mashpim during the marriage in hopes to get things right. As you have probably guessed, the marriage ended in divorce, and my ex took my child, has not remained frum, etc. Since then, the mashpim and the masker, the secretary, have apologized to my parents and me, and admitted that they were gravely mistaken. What I have realized from this experience is that while well-meaning and learned in Torah topics, often a true professional needs to be consulted and not just a well-meaning rabbi. Your thoughts? Thanks for your teachings and insight. Well, I agree and disagree with what you wrote. First of all, my heart goes out to you, and absolutely, it's terrible to hear what you describe, and that's why I read it, because unfortunately there are other people that may be in similar situations, and we need to address it. When you write, it's important that a mashpia should be someone who's not just Chassidish but has professional training. Not necessarily. A good mashpia will know his limits, and will know that if something is outside of the league, he will refer you or refer a person to a professional if need be. So I don't think every mashpia, when the Rebbe spoke about the Sikha mashpia, and this is not nothing to connect it to your experience here, I just wanted to make it clear. He said everybody should, a mashpia is essentially a friend, an objective mentor maybe, that is trying to help somebody. Now, any good person with some common sense knows that if it's areas that are touching on medical areas, or areas that are outside of that person's capacity, they should refer them to the right person. That's also what a mashpia does. They give you the objectivity and say you need to talk to someone. Very often, I'll come to speak to me, and I realize they should go speak to a third party or a fourth person or someone I may know. Sometimes people send me. Mashpiyim send people, suggest they send them to me. It's all, that's part of the process. And sometimes a mashpiyah can be very competent and a professional, and they may also give you bad advice. So I just wanted to qualify and not just come to black and white. Now, as far as your circumstances goes, I'm not sure who, and I'm not here to judge anybody. Clearly it was bad advice, and the mashpiyah could have been incompetent, maybe not even Torah knowledgeable. That's also possible. So I think there's more than just a matter of that. It's finding people you could trust, and you also trust that they will know when they can say, I don't know what to do here, I need you to talk to someone else, I think you should talk to a third party. So these are very painful situations, and sometimes they can happen even with very good people, with good intentions, and knowledgeable, and it can happen with professionals too. Do you think every professional therapist gives always the best advice? And things don't end up in nightmares and so on? Not necessarily. They're not God. So you have to really assess case by case. The challenge is to find the right mashpia that has the combination of common sense and humility and intelligence to know what to say, what not to say, when to suggest and refer to another party. So that's my response, while still saying that we have to do everything possible, especially when it comes to matters of marriage, which is much more sensitive. We have to really bend over backwards. It's one thing you give somebody advice between them and themselves, also has to be done with a seriousness. But that's part of the risks involved, and not everybody's really competent. The Rebbe that Yutas Kislev Lamed Zayin 40 years ago speaks that everybody should offer, if they feel they can, to be mashpia. That doesn't mean that they're good. And the proof will be in the pudding, and we have to test it. Everything has to be tested. I would not just say, be my mashpia to the end of my life. You see, if it works, it has to click. The advice has to make sense. It has to work and make your life better, not worse, God forbid. Finally, a third follow-up. What's wrong with a handshake follow-up? Regarding the handshake, this was 2 weeks ago. We spoke about that. Was it 2 weeks ago or last week? One of the two. It was not clear if this was only in regards opposite gender. Are the boundaries of touch put in place only when it comes to the other gender? Should there be boundaries of touch when it comes to the same gender as well to maintain its meaning? Also, I'd love to hear your advice on how to teach a child when touch is right from wrong. Children's books today teach that if it feels wrong, it's wrong. But this doesn't help teach children learn whether touch that doesn't feel wrong is good or not. Looking forward to hearing your insight. Okay. Well, look, we have a Torah for these things. The Torah tells us which boundaries are not boundaries. The Torah does not have any issue with the same gender hugging each other or handshakes and so on. Obviously, God forbid, I don't even want to mention it. If the same gender, there's some other intentions going on, or someone feels uncomfortable with somebody, whatever reason that may be, so then you shouldn't, of course, avoid it. But generally speaking, the issue is between genders, between male and female. That's the issue in Torah. I've never heard an issue of Shem and Negiah and boundaries that have to be placed between the same gender. Again, this is barring exceptions and situations, which is case by case in that regard. I know we live in a world today where boundaries and identities are all confused, but we have a Torah that tells us where there's hilchos yichud, which means you shouldn't be alone with an opposite gender, and where there isn't. There's also laws, by the way, about sleeping in a bed with even the same gender, and so on. So there are laws for all these matters, but the question, basic touch, shaking, or the things we talked about then, the handshake, that does not apply to the same gender, at least to my knowledge. If somebody has something they found that's different, by all means, please share it. And as I said, we're not talking about exceptions or anomalies. Chassidus Question, which we've chosen a question which again relates to Dalet Kislev, being that it's this week, marriage, relationships. All relationships, well, actually no, I should start from here. In episode 65, you mentioned that there are various connections a couple can and should develop. But the first three levels, which is nefesh, ruach, neshama, which you said was physical, emotional, and intellectual compatibility, are transient. But the spiritual connection is eternal. These correspond to the levels of, the first three correspond to nefesh, ruach, neshama, the other to Chaya and then Yechida. My question is this, is whether the spiritual connection is really all that is different than the first three. After all, people grow and change spiritually, and often couples change at different pace and in different directions. Additionally, all relationships mirror the relationship between God and the Jew in which all levels of the neshama are engaged. In a marriage, however, what does it mean to incorporate Chaya and Yechida? Are they not dimensions of the soul that are inaccessible? Okay, so it's a twofold question. First of all, let me repeat what I said then in episode 65. Nefesh, ruach, and neshama, you say, we talk about soulmate, pla gufa, or other terms that are used. Soulmate means Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, male and female, Zachar nekeva bara esam, as an androgynous creature, two partsufim, and then separated them. And that's why they seek out each other to be whole again, complete again, with the divine image in which they were created. Al Kain Yazav Adam, and all the psukim say. So this connection therefore means it's a soul connection. And it's a soul connection with the divine. We know in Chassidus, nefesh, ruach, neshama. So I explained that nefesh, ruach, neshama in relationships is physical compatibility, biological compatibility. Nefesh is the biological part of life. Ruach is the emotional compatibility, not just physical attraction, sexual attraction. And number 3 is neshama, intellectual compatibility, which is meichen. Those are the conscious faculties. What I said then was these are transient, they change. Physical attraction, emotional compatibility, intellectual compatibility can go through changes. However, binyan adeyad, the eternal edifice, has to be built something that doesn't go through change, and I call that spiritual compatibility. Two people who share a vision, and what kind of home, what kind of family, what kind of legacy, what kind of children they want to bring into this world, what energy they're bringing into this world. That transcends the differences of age, transcends the difference of emotional changes and intellectual changes in a person's life. So it is a dimension of Chaya, or even Chaya and Yechida if you wish. Sometimes Chaya and Yechida is seen as one. We talk about Dalet nefashos, where you speak both of them as a transcendent, and Chaya and Yechida spoke about as in one category. So the first question is, doesn't spiritual connection also go through changes? Yes, it goes through changes in the sense of how you experience it, but not the connection. Let's say a couple who decided to go on shlichus for the Rebbe. That's a lifetime thing. The shlichus may change. They may open a school at some point. At some point, they may pass on some of the work to their children, and they play a role that's a more veteran role. I mean, there's a lot of things, but that's how you do it. But the fundamental connection of a shliach to the mishaleach, and that they've dedicated their lives to that purpose, does not change at all. Their age will change, their looks will change, their emotions and intellectual things will change, but not the spiritual foundation will not change. Even if you have different programs, the programs do not reflect on the foundation. That's one point. This is true even if someone, let's say, okay, I gave the example of shliach. What about if I'm not a shliach? I'm a business person, and I have a wife who works as well. We're fine people, but they also need a spiritual foundation. It could be that you host a lot of guests. It could be you're involved in volunteer work in some area. Something spiritual that keeps the foundational, soulful element of a home and marriage together, again, transcends. You study together. So these things, they may change what you're doing, but not the fundamental foundation. When it comes to emotion, intellectual or emotions or physical, what's the foundation in the first place? You like the other person physically, but now they've changed. That's changed, and the whole thing is based on something physical. There's nothing there that's eternal, inherently internal. Same thing, the emotions. Same thing with intellectual. Now, interestingly, if you have the Chaya and Yechida connection to that, it will infuse that you will see beauty even when your spouse may be a little older. And you will see also an emotional attachment and an intellectual one. Why? Because it's being fed by something that's greater and deeper. Now, as far as the second question goes, the question you're asking about Chaya and Yechida, the same question is with God. It's true, they're super conscious faculties. In the language of Chassidus, nefesh is often asiya or nihi. Ruach is yitzira or za midas, chagas. Neshama is bria chabad. So what's Chaya and Yechida? Chaya and Yechida is keser. And the keser itself, you have Chaya is arich and Yechida is atik. All year round, we are focused on 3 prayers a day. Shabbos, we add Chaya, and Yom Tov, we add Chaya. And Yom Kippur, there's the only day you have Ne'ilah Yechida. So where's Yechida the rest of the year? The answer is we don't directly access it. It's there like a pilot flame. In moments of crisis and danger, Kal Shebekalim, there's Yechida can emerge. But there are things that we don't necessarily actively have to work on, but it's still there. The same thing is in the connection between husband and wife. The things you work on is nefesh, ruach, neshama. The spiritual connection, the transcendent connection, there's parts of it you can talk about. But the ultimate part that's a foundational part of the binyan adeyad, the yesod, that ayisei de'atera mitzvahs, which lies under the building, it's under the building. You don't visit foundations often. Unfortunately, you visit them when there's a problem with the structure. So a foundation just sits there, and that's the connection two people have that really transcends their differences. So it's not about accessing it and directly working in it. It's part of the fabric, the part of the glue that really is beyond their conscious abilities. But that doesn't mean it's not there. It's like the Rotzen and Tainug in Nefesh. They're fundamental forces, but they're not conscious, they're more transcendent forces. So I hope that helps explain that question. Another thing I should say about it is Chassidus talks about Asusa de Latata, Asusa de Leila, that through your effort you can bring down an energy from above. But then there's a level from above you can't directly draw down. We count 49 days of the Omer and we refine ourselves, and then number 50 we don't count. That's Hamshacham Omayla. But if you don't have 49, you're not going to get the 50. The same thing with Chaya and Yechida. You do what you have to do in the level of Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, infused by the spiritual compatibility, which is Chaya. Then the deeper parts of Chaya and the deeper parts of Yechida will emerge when necessary, or they'll just be there in a strong foundational way that protects and serves us right. Okay, 3 essays. Let's do the 3 essays, and here they are. First essay is a Hebrew essay by Yitzchak Francis called Happiness, a 5-Step Program. Age 39, Shliach Yam HaMelech, Arad, Israel. Okay, this is a very creative essay. He takes the word Hasimcha, which is 5 letters, going through Simcha and then the Hey Hasimcha, and turns it into a 5-step plan and program to happiness. And the Rosh Tevis in Hebrew, I'll say them quickly, is Hasimcha. What are the Rosh Tevis? Based on, here we go. Shin of Simcha, Shinui. Mem is Muhus and Midas. Ches is Chashiva, which means thoughtfulness and mindfulness. Hapnama is Hey, which is Pnimius. And then finally the Hey, Hasimcha, is the Das Alakei Avicha. And breaks down based on the Tzemach Tzedek that says, someone who thinks happy thoughts and is careful from speaking negative things and depressing things and behaves in a joyous way will ultimately become joyous. Uses that as how we heighten our state of consciousness on all these levels that I just said in the Rosh Hashanah is the acronym of Hasimcha, and how that can bring a happier life. So, very creative essay. I like reading it. A lot of interesting ideas. And it's really something worthwhile reading in Hebrew. All these essays can be seen at meaningfullife.com/MyLife /essays-2016. And you can also receive them if you subscribe to our weekly email. The next one, Achieving Greatness. Shimon Gruen, age 34, president at the Gift of Understanding, Brooklyn, New York. This essay I would like to explore, he writes, the Chassidic approach to fulfilling one's mission in life and achieving true greatness. Through Chassidic works, we are given a certain understanding and appreciation of the significance and importance of creation and our role in it. Chassidus teaches that true greatness is not always noticeable and in fact differs from person to person. Through Chassidus, we can gain clarity on the goal we are charged to accomplish. He goes on to speak about Chassidus Lefnim Meshur Sadin, going beyond the letter of the law. The famous story with the Frierdiker Rebbe tells about Zalman Zezmer, what's Chassidus Moich Shal Talev, and then the Alter Rebbe's additions. So based on this, on that structure, describes basically using Chassidus, very nicely done, in how we become, we achieve the greatness we are capable of, what we were created for, and gives a several step program at the end using the Eish Ruach Mayim Offer modality. And again, a well worth essay. Thank you much for that. Also well resourced and well annotated. Well researched, I should say. And finally, essay number 3, Being Happy by Being Yourself. Moshe Bachman, age 25, rabbi at United Lubavitch Yeshiva Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. And he begins with a quote from the Kotzker Rebbe, and basically about low self-esteem, how low self-esteem is such a personal and delicate matter, and it's perhaps one of the most difficult obstacles to overcome, because we develop another personality to hide our low self-esteem. And he uses the Maimer Samach to Samach of the Rebbe Rashab, Tafresh Nun Zayin, pages 260-262, and gets to the root. Contentment stems from the realization of one's true self and his purpose. The feeling of low self-worth is rooted, therefore, in a lack of awareness of one's identity. And talks about how one regains connection to their identity and what the real definition of self-esteem is. Confidence with no strings attached. The Chassidic approach to self-esteem provides the perfect balance for a healthy human being. And it describes in a very nice way. I really enjoyed reading this one as well, so I commend you for that. And then talks about different games we play with our heads and different voices that we have, and how you can change your language that you speak to yourself in this regard. Okay. And of course, the need to begin action. So that's the 3 essays, and with that we shall sign off on this 141st episode of MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please keep your questions coming, your comments, your thoughts, your rebuttals, some things I said here today that maybe some of you can help with clarification, especially that note I read from the Rebbe, which I'd love to hear more background behind that. And I also say in the next week or two we're going to talk about the consensus of all those of you that submitted response to the 3 greatest challenges that our community is facing. So if you'd like to weigh in on that, please do so at our anonymous forum, meaningfullife.com/mylife. We should celebrate together with the Rebbe and Rebbe's and Begashmias and learn the lessons necessary in our own personal lives to live up to the model that they present to us, relationships, marriage, and ultimately the Yichud, Kuchabrichu v'Knes Yisrael, and the Gula Mitzvah Vashlema, which is called the ultimate Kiddushin. And not just Edison, that was by Matan Torah, but the Kiddushin, the complete Nisuyin of marriage between heaven and earth, between the divine and the material, between Jew and God, and between the entire universe with its purpose in the Gula Amitis Vashlema. So until next Sunday, everyone have a blessed week. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 141. Thank you.